I am MD, host of the fourth branch program, inviting you to join me every Saturday at 10:30 a.m. and every weekday at 2 p.m. for discussions of social political issues and to dissect the meaning and the importance of current events as well as to understand topics of legislation. The fourth branch project is not associated with any political party, and we at the fourth branch do not have any political agenda or aspiration. Our ultimate objective is to work towards achieving a more perfect union by removing ignorance, the biggest obstacle to our democracy. Stay with us. We will be right back. Welcome to the fourth branch program. Glad you can make it. I am MD. This program is dedicated exclusively for those with common sense, a spirit of patriotism, and a determination for a more perfect union. Stay tuned as we begin the discussion of a very important, interesting, and enlightening topic. Hope to hear from you soon. Happy listening. Hello everyone, I am MD and this is the fourth branch program. Welcome. I'm glad you can join us today as we continue the conversation about two major aspects of our government. Rather, two important aspects that impact our lives and which we will discuss today. We have been discussing for the past few weeks, but today we will continue the conversation in order to perfect the union. One of the aspects of the conversation, of course, is race relation. At this point in the conversation, we are at a crossroad, the Civil War. We started the conversation last week, and we have been talking about three important individuals during the Civil War. It is a bridge that is worth crossing. It is also a bridge that's worth going back and forth in order to understand the dynamic of race relation in America. And the second aspect of our discussion is, of course, our democracy. And we have been talking about that since, well, eon. And for the past 2 years, we have used the banner that our democracy is in serious jeopardy. Of course, ignored by some, shrugged off by others. The fact remains that for the past 2 years, it has been very obvious that we as a society have a problem in this country. When we return, we will start with the first topic, race relation in America. We will continue the conversation, of course, with the fact that our democracy is in jeopardy. Our goal is to explore solution. Hopefully. We'll be right back. I am MD, host of the fourth branch program, inviting you to join me every Saturday at 10:30 a.m. and every weekday at 2 p.m. for discussions of social-political issues and to dissect the meaning and the importance of current events as well as to understand topics of legislation. The Fourth Branch Project is not associated with any political party, and we at the Fourth Branch do not have any political agenda or aspiration. Our ultimate objective is to work towards achieving a more perfect union by removing ignorance, the biggest obstacle to our democracy. Stay with us. We will be right back. Couple of months, we have been honing in on race relation in America. Under the banner War on Blacks, we have approached this particular predicament in our country in order to understand why in the midst of the 21st century we still have a race relation problem. Racism, discriminations, rampant in the country. But the question remains, why? Now, most people that I've talked to refer to the fact that slavery is over. Then we shouldn't have a problem, or we shouldn't be talking about slavery anymore. And others simply minimize the situation, that to them, it's only the white supremacists or the KKK or people on the fringe of society who continue to practice racism and discrimination. As we will demonstrate, this is not so today. The problem is widespread. It is across the country. It is not confined to just one corner of our society or one corner of the country. It is no longer in the South where slavery was widespread. It is no longer in just one part of the country. Because of migration, we have seen racism, discrimination in every aspect of life, in every corner of our society. As such, it becomes necessary to address this problem and hopefully to find a solution for this plague in the country. We'll be right back. Hi, I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program. War on Blacks is a new topic added to the Fourth Branch programming in order to discuss the intricacies, the complexities of race relations in America. The goal is threefold. One, to bring attention to the various forms of prejudice, discriminations, and racism in the country. Two, to expose the undeniable presence of such in every aspect of life and every corner of our society. Three, to extricate us all from the ignorance, the indifference, or the complicity. The ultimate objective is to make the discussions of those issues, racism, prejudice, discrimination, a normal part of our lives. Then, and only then, will we, as a society, be able to eradicate the problem. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Abraham Joshua Shaw exclaimed, "Racism is man's greatest threat to man, the maximum of hatred for the minimum of reason." Join me in the journey to restore equality. Or would you please get out of the way? Thank you. In order to solve any problem, first it has to be acknowledged. Now, for those of you who've joined for the first time, who has not seen this program, first I would encourage you to head to the People Branch YouTube channel, where all the previous episodes of this program are archived. You'll find it. We talk about a lot of detail of this particular topic, race relation, which is under the banner War on Blacks, Race Relation, or Institutionalized Racism. So either or all of those banners are the videos in which we discuss race relation at various times. Now, again, if you join for the first time, the banner of War on Blacks was not picked just to sensationalize this discussion, but rather to point to the fact that there have been casualties on the war on blacks. Someone mentioned that there is no war on blacks, but I can point to you, to anyone who question this use of the banner, that since even beyond slavery, the casualty have been mounting on the black side. Physical casualties, emotional casualties, psychological casualties, and financial casualties. Even as of date that we're talking, blacks continue to be executed, gunned down, unarmed blacks by those whose primary job is to protect our society. Yes, there is indeed a war on blacks. Yes, we may be shy calling it that because, well, it doesn't seem to advance the discussions, or it seems to put the discussion on the back burner. But as we see, we've been witnessing that since for decades that we have not had much progress done on the race relation. And there is a reason for that. Most people who are concerned, which is everybody, on the white side, it feels awkward, it feels different, it feels not the right thing to talk about because it evokes a certain guilt towards black, because obviously blacks were slaves. And on the black side, there seems to be this idea that talking about it would exacerbate the situation, meaning the race relation will get worse and worse. Now, although I'm not in any position to argue for or against any of those positions people on both sides have taken, but one thing remains certain. Beyond slavery, we are still talking about racism, widespread racism. We are still talking about widespread discrimination. So if the position taken by both sides are supposed to solve the problem, it's not doing it. As such, as human beings, as individuals with brains, it is necessary to use a different strategy, to use a different approach to the problem. And we at the Fourth Branch have found what that problem is. Every time a unarmed black individual is gunned down by a police officer, there is always an army of individual experts who rush to television to express their opinion as to what needs to be done, what must be done in order to bridge the gap, the race relation gap. And that conversation will happen for a couple of days, and everybody will go back to their regular business until the next unarmed black man is gunned down, and you'll have the same thing repeated over and over and over. So the approach is not working. The silent approach, ignoring something, doesn't solve it. Pretending that it's not does not make it disappear. A problem can only be solved when a solution is applied. As such, here at the Fourth Branch, we have taken the steps of doing a number of things. One, trying to explore, understand, or even find the roots of the problem. And two, of course, try to make certain that everybody who is involved, all parties which are concerned, acknowledge the problem. And of course, the final solution is to explore possibilities to eradicate racism in the country. So let's set the record straight. There are two major groups of whites in the country. There are, on one side, millions of whites who are racist, who are bigots, who discriminate on a regular basis. And there are, on the other side, millions of whites who are not racist, who do not discriminate. And that's what at the root of the major that's what makes the finding a solution to the problem so difficult, because it is not uniform in terms of how the level of understanding, the level of acknowledgement. This is not uniform across the country. But we have to agree on one thing, which no one can avoid or no one can deny: the fact that racism, discrimination, widespread in the United States. This is not confined to the white supremacists. It is not confined to the white nationalists. It is not confined to the KKK or the small group of individuals who make a lot of noise, but there are very few of them. Yes, the white nationalists, the white supremacists, the KKK, they protest, they march, in fact, if you remember a couple of years ago, that they were marching in Charlottesville, they were making a lot of noise, there were a lot of coverage of the media, so they make noise. They small group and they make a lot of noise, but they are not the problem in the United States when it comes to race relations. If it were to be just those people, we would not have had a race relation problem in America. Because again, it is a very, very, very small group. The problem of race relations is because, of course, those who practice it, those who discriminate, those who are racist, they do not do that openly like the white supremacists or the white nationalists. In fact, it would have been pretty cool to be able to identify each individual who is racist or each individual who is not. And the reason for that, because it would have made it easier to interact with individuals. Because if I know you are racist, then I have a way of interacting with you. But because it's not known, it's hidden, it's subtle, then there is no way to know that, and there is no way to interact, and it makes even the idea of eradicating racism in America all the more difficult. You go and apply, example, a black and a white apply for a job. Now, the black is not called in, not because he's not qualified, but because the institution, the workplace, the environment simply is run by individuals who are either racist, who discriminate, who simply do not want anything to do with blacks. It is a widespread problem that has to be acknowledged in order to solve that problem. I mentioned it before. No matter how smart, no matter how much of an expert any individual here in the United States or anywhere in the world happens to be, unless there is an acknowledgement of the problem, there cannot be any solution. And the reason is because how could you provide, how could you propose solution for something that you do not think exists? If you do not think that there is a problem, you cannot possibly implement a solution for that thing. It is no different when we talk about race relation in America. Now, we had a very lengthy discussions about race, the interactions between blacks and whites, especially during slavery time. We cannot rehash that here. As I mentioned earlier, we have tons of video currently on the People Branch YouTube channel that provide information that are really lengthy details about this aspect of our history. Again, do not expect to get a class or a course on history, because the only thing we have been doing is take very specific aspect of that time and discuss it with in the basis of race relation, black and white in the country, as to why we started there, slavery time, and what happened during slavery. And now, as I mentioned in the beginning of this program, we are at a crossroad, which is the Civil War. Now, the Civil War, if you may recall, the Civil War started because, well, depending on the individual who writes about the Civil War, they have different they give different reason behind that particular time in history. Now, there are many different reasons that you can give. Economical was one of the major aspects that's talked a lot about in many books that were written about the Civil War. But one aspect, one common denominator of all those writing, no matter which angle the writer decided to use to write about the Civil War, one thing remained constant. Blacks were slaves. Blacks were mistreated. Blacks were executed for trying to escape to freedom. Blacks were executed for even feeling sick, for even feeling unable to work. Blacks were put to work 18 hours a day. Blacks were beat until they bled. Those aspects of slavery cannot be removed, no matter which angle the individual writing about slavery, which aspect the individual took. That cannot be removed. Now we talk about two individuals. Well, actually, we mentioned there are three very important individuals to talk about during the Civil War. The first one we talk about is Robert Lee. Now you may remember Robert Lee, especially during the time that the white supremacists and the white nationalists were marching in Charlottesville, and even beyond that, even in New York, there are statues of Robert Lee. Now those statues were erected in order to honor Robert Lee. Now he was a commander of the Virginia armed forces. Now he raised to prominence because of the fact that he served 32 years in the armed forces, in the United States Armed Forces, and he was even lauded for his brilliance in the Mexican War. Now, the reason that we talked about Robert Lee is because during the Civil War, he changed camp from serving in the United States Armed Forces, and he joined the Confederate States. And also he was raised to the post of becoming an advisor for Jefferson Davis. Now Jefferson Davis was the president of the Confederate States. Now you may recall that during the Civil War, now let me back up just a bit to say that the Civil War was a way for a group of states, which known under the Confederate States, for a group of states to take a position vis-a-vis slavery. Now the Confederate States were pro-slavery, and the Union, which is the other side, were anti-slavery. Now the Jefferson Davis was president of the Confederate States. He was the first and the only president. He served from 1861 to 1865. Now Robert Lee, which I mentioned earlier, served as the advisor for Jefferson Davis. So he was raised to prominence. But that's not the reason actually I picked Robert Lee, because he wasn't the only individual who was a leader of battalion, of a group of soldiers to fight against the Union. But the reason I pick to talk about Robert Lee is because there is something interesting about him. It is the fact that despite his decision to join the Confederate States, Robert Lee remained an interesting figure in the Civil War for the simple reason that he seemed to have had what we call a heart. And the reason I say that is because while he was fighting against the Union in order to keep slavery around, but he was also very much concerned about the treatment that were being inflicted on the slave. Now, Robert Lee understood that slaves were needed for the economy of the South. That much Robert Lee grasped and understood, and he went along with that idea that the South had to have slaves in order for the economy of the South to strive. Now, this is not to make an excuse for Robert Lee, but in order to understand how troubled Robert Lee was, how much a struggle he had, internal struggle that he had, while he wanted the Confederate States to win because he understood the position and wanted to for those white slave owners to strive, but using free laborers, of course, slaves. But at the same time, as I mentioned earlier, he wasn't so much in favor of the kind of treatment that were being inflicted on the slaves. That's one. But second, he was so conflicted, and although history doesn't tell us that could have played a role on him being defeated, because remember, he was a very brilliant commander of the armed forces, but he had so much internal struggle that I suspect that maybe that had something to do with the way that he was, the kind of strategy, the way that he was trying to maneuver through this whole war aspect and try to win, to get a victory for the Confederate States. But there was also another thing that Robert Lee had to cope with, is the fact that as a commander, now he had to rely on the very people that they want to keep slave. That was a dilemma, wasn't it? Now you want to keep the South away from the rest of the country in order to keep slavery around, but they were so short in manpower to fight against the Union that they had to resort to enroll slaves to fight a war against a side that want to free them. Quite a dilemma, wasn't it? But in any event, at the end of the whole war, Robert Lee was defeated. He surrendered, and in fact, he was so much conflicted internally that he even reapplied for his citizenship, because during the war that he decided he lost his citizenship along with everybody that went the other way. He decided to reapply for his citizenship. He didn't get that back. He died before he got back his citizenship. But in the end, even in the midst of the 20th century, he was granted that citizenship by one of the governors in Virginia. Now, the last person I would like to talk about is, of course, someone you very well should know about, is Abraham Lincoln. When we come back, we will talk about Abraham Lincoln in order to close the circle about the Civil War. We'll be right back.
Hi, I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program. War on Blacks is a new topic added to the Fourth Branch programming in order to discuss the intricacies, the complexities of race relations in America. The goal is threefold. One, to bring attention to the various forms of prejudice, discrimination, and racism in the country. Two, to expose the undeniable presence of such in every aspect of life and every corner of our society. 3. To extricate us all from the ignorance, the indifference, or the complicity. The ultimate objective is to make the discussions of those issues, racism, prejudice, discrimination, a normal part of our lives. Then, and only then, will we, as a society, be able to eradicate the problem. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Abraham Joshua Shaw exclaimed, "Racism is man's gravest threat to man, the maximum of hatred for the minimum of reason." Join me in the journey to restore equality. Or would you please get out of the way? Thank you.
Abraham Lincoln is the man that blacks, or the country, I should say, should have a huge debt of gratitude for his decency. Now, Abraham Lincoln said that, "As I will not be a slave, I cannot be a master." Now, you may recall during the Civil War, I mentioned it before and I'll mention it again, that since the beginning of time, there have always been two groups of whites in the country. Those who are racist and who discriminate, and those who are not. So there have always been millions of whites who wanted to keep slavery around, and millions of others who fought with their lives and wanted to put an end to slavery. Now, Abraham Lincoln, I must say that they knew exactly where he stood before he became President of the United States. They knew exactly where he stood. And the reason I say that is because when Abraham Lincoln became president, prior to Mr. Lincoln running for the presidency of the United States, there was always a fear that maybe there were some people in Washington, if we can use that term, federal government, legislators, congressmen in the federal government, who would want to put an end to slavery. Now, I may have mentioned before that since 1850, remember that Abraham Lincoln signed executive order an act to put an end to slavery in 1863 actually, but the official date that actually happened is 1865. But since 1850, both South Carolina and Mississippi wanted to secede from the United States. They wanted to have nothing to do with the United States because they started to feel that there was some shift in people's minds as to whether they wanted slavery to still be around. And because of that, I guess legislators in those states pictured that if we don't do that at some point, maybe we're gonna lose everything, because if slavery was to be abolished, then we would lose all means of enriching ourselves. And Abraham Lincoln was always a well-known individual against slavery. He didn't hide it. He didn't have any slave. Now Jefferson Davis, on the other hand, the gentleman who became the only president of the Confederate States, had 7. Now Abraham Lincoln didn't have any slave. No, his parents didn't have any slave either. That was the dilemma in the country. And of course that dilemma still exists here in the United States, that we have two large group of whites, those who continue to practice discrimination and those who are, and of course we have on the other side whites who are fighting alongside blacks to try to put an end to this plague, which is not good for the country. So Abraham Lincoln was always that individual that people knew that where he stood, that he was against slavery. So when he became president, needless to tell you, now there is something that's a little bit interesting between Abraham Lincoln and Barack Obama. You may recall when Obama won the general election in 2008, there was paranoia. There were influxes of individuals rushing to firearm store to buy weapons, to buy ammunition, because there were these rumors that Obama was going to take everyone's gun away. You may not recall that, but there was sales of firearms skyrocketed in 2008. Between the time that Obama won the presidency in 2008 and by the time he was sworn in, sales of weapons skyrocketed because everybody was rushing to buy firearms because the Obama administration was going to take their weapons away. Now Abraham Lincoln, on the other hand, there was something similar, but contrary to the rumors under Obama, Abraham Lincoln did not hide his true feeling. He did not hide the way that he felt about slavery. So needless to say, when he was elected president of the United States, there was a rush for the states that previously considered the idea of seceding from the United States of America. Then they start really putting things in to make that happen. And they did. Now, on the map you're looking at on your screen, the red part of the map represent the Confederate States, the state that decided not only, well, it's pretty synonymous that if we talk about Confederate state, all of those states were pro-slavery and they had slaves. So the red part in the map were completely pro-slavery. Now, the pink part of the map, interestingly enough, were states of the Union, meaning states that were fighting against slavery. But interestingly enough, the pink states did have slavery, which means they condoned, they allowed individuals who were capable of owning slaves to have slaves. So how did that work? That you would have states that had slaves, and yet those states joined the Union to fight against the Confederate States. That was an interesting dynamic at that time. Now, there is no doubt whatsoever that white slave owners, they mistreated slaves. They dehumanized slaves. They torture slaves, and they inflicted on slaves harsh punishment that would get you to shed tears, even reading about it. And that's why the dynamic is so interesting to see that there were states that decided to join the Union and fought against the states that were pro-slavery, nevertheless. And the remaining part of the country were mostly part of the United States. Now, the blue part are the Union States. Of course, the rest of the country were just the United States of America. Now, I pointed to you that Robert Lee was a brilliant commander of the armed forces, joined the Confederate States. Jefferson Davis, that's Robert Lee, he was in the armed forces for 32 years and decided to join the Confederate States. Jefferson Davis was the president of the Confederate States. And of course, we have Abraham Lincoln. Now, Abraham Lincoln was president of the United States. Of course, with the Confederate States splitting from the United States, they had a similar structure to the United States, meaning everything that the framers of the Constitution set in terms of how the government should be, the Confederate States adopted that. So they had the president, a vice president, they have Congress, they have Senate, and they have the same structure, exactly the same. The only thing that they changed was the president term. Now, the framers of the Constitution intended for the the framers of the Constitution didn't put a term limit on a president. If you remember that George Washington decided not to get a third term because he just decided personally not to get a third term. After his second term, he just walked away. But there was nothing in the Constitution that would have prevented him to continue to be president until he died. Now, the Confederate States did set one term limit for the president, but the term limit was 6 years instead of 4 years. That was the only difference between the actual United States of America and the Confederate States, which wanted to just split from the United States. In other words, if they were to be successful, today we would have two different countries. One in which there would still be slaves, slavery would still strive, and one where obviously there would not be any slavery. Now, Abraham Lincoln being the person that he was, decided it was the human thing to do. It was the decent thing to do. It was absolutely necessary to gamble his presidency. Now, it's not something you're going to find today. You're not going to find that here in the United States, because as you can see, the current state of affairs in the United States, you have politicians, Republicans in general, who have sold their soul to the devil in order to keep their job. Yes, this is what we're going to be talking about on the second part of this conversation, where our democracy is taking a plunge, a dive, not because of any foreign entity, not because of Russia, but because the very individual who are supposed to uphold the Constitution of the United States, who are supposed to defend the country, those are the very people who have sold their soul to the devil in order to keep their job. Now, he was Abraham Lincoln. He knew he was gambling his presidency. He knew that, because think about it. The minute that Abraham Lincoln became president of the United States, there were already turmoil in the country where a group of states started to put in motion to just split from the United States. That was it, as if that weren't bad enough. So Abraham Lincoln could have tried to save his political career. He could have, because he knew exactly what he had to do. Just like you see the Republicans today that prefer to do the wrong thing in order to keep their job. See the contrast? See how big of a contrast it is today? Today we have individuals who took an oath to protect the United States of America, to uphold the Constitution, and yet they throw away the Constitution, they threw away the as far as oath is concerned. What the hell? It didn't matter. But Abraham Lincoln knew exactly what he could have done in order to keep his position, in order to rally people around him, in order to become popular. At that time, of course, Abraham Lincoln is a very popular and famous individual in history, but in history, at the time that he made the decision to end slavery, it wasn't popular. That wasn't a popular decision to take. That wasn't a popular decision to make. That wasn't a popular position to take. And yet, Abraham Lincoln did exactly that. My God, there were decent individuals in politics who knew what to do, what was the right thing to do. Today, we're looking at a Republican Party who have sold their soul to the devil. And we're not talking about one or two individuals. The whole Republican Party in Washington, both congressmen and senators, they have sold their soul just to keep their job. Now imagine for a second that slave were to have to rely on those individuals today. Imagine what the state of affairs would have been. They would have had to wait a very long time. My God, those individuals don't seem to understand why they in the position they're in. They're not there to serve an individual. They're there to serve the interests of the United States, not the interests of Donald Trump. And when you think about it, the country would have been really in a very bad shape to have anyone, take any one of those individuals in Washington today, any one of those Republicans, and try to imagine any one of those individuals in the same predicament as Abraham Lincoln. Try to imagine that and see what happened. Abraham Lincoln gambled his presidency in order to do what was right, what was decent, what was appropriate. Today, Republicans sold their soul in order to stay in their position. What a contrast. What a big contrast. Maybe they don't know that Abraham Lincoln had risen to the level of fame not because he was just a politician, but because he did at the time it was necessary. He took the unpopular step. He made the unpopular decision. The South relied exclusively on slaves to grow their economy. The white slave owners, they were rich people. They made a fortune on the back of black slaves. Now imagine that for a moment, that here is a president. He was well aware of all those facts. He had advisors. He had people telling him, Mr. President, if you take that position, you're not going to be popular. You're not going to be reelected. Today, that's all that matters to every single Republican politician. What needs to be done to get reelected? Abraham Lincoln, the third most important individual that I did propose to talk about. Here he is, the individual who put his own career on the line. Remember I talked before about John Brown, civilian, who put his own life and the lives of his family on the line to fight against slavery. John Brown was not looking for a political position. John Brown was not looking to become known as someone fighting slavery. He just was disgusted by the practice. Today, we have Republicans who cannot even hold the line against a corrupt president, who cannot even stand against a corrupt president, who cannot even go against a president which by any analysis had collaborated with a foreign enemy. Now that the Republican Party we have. Imagine any of those individuals having to take a position that was unpopular at the time. Imagine that for a second.
Join me here on the fourth branch at 10:30 a.m. every Saturday. And every weekday at 2 p.m.
This is the fourth branch.
Common sense in a world of chaos.
This program will resume in just a moment.
As I started to say earlier, the relying on individuals whose primary job is to uphold the Constitution of the United States, and yet, guess what? Those same individuals, those very individuals are the ones who are actually driving the country into the mud, who are taking the country down a path that you would say, now it's understandable to have someone like Donald Trump being what he is. He has, if Donald Trump is successful at the biggest con in his life, managed to con millions of people to vote for him to become the president of the United States. That was the biggest con. And it's not just like those who support Donald Trump who want to bash anybody who put their fingers on what Donald Trump is doing, or who discuss, who expose what Donald Trump is doing to the country. I don't know how blind anybody has to be not to see what has been happening to the country. Now, to a few of those individuals that I have talked to that seem to think that this is the best thing that has happened since sliced bread, we are currently preparing an expose to show you that Donald Trump has not accomplished anything for the country. Everything that he has talked about, nothing has changed. He has accomplished zero, zilch, nothing. So far, the only thing he has done is expose the flaws in our Constitution. The only other thing he has done is to expose the Republican Party for the members of the Republican Party for who they really are. And I said it before, and I'll say it again. Donald Trump did not turn the Republican Party into a Donald Trump party. I heard that expression. I heard a lot of people making that statement, making that comment, and say that Donald Trump has changed the Republican Party into a Donald Trump party. No, Donald Trump did not. Now, we have to give Donald Trump credit for one thing. He has helped to expose the Republicans for who they really are. Donald Trump is not Jesus. He did not change the heart and the soul of those individuals. No, Donald Trump did not do that. Nobody wakes up one day and becomes so good at changing people's heart and change their heart. No, Donald Trump did not do that. To those who continue to argue that, I said hogwash. Those individuals, what you see them doing, They've always been what you are currently looking at. Those Republican legislators, congressmen, senators, elected officials, governors, mayors, they have always been who they are. The only thing we didn't know, they were not exposed the way they are today. And Donald Trump helped to expose them. That's all Donald Trump has done. We can go down the line. Republicans always claim to be fiscally conservative, right? Bill Clinton left the country with a surplus. The first year of George W. Bush, the surplus was wiped out and the national debt went up. Right? Fiscally conservative went up. And under Donald Trump, same story. Fiscally conservative. Republicans were up in arms during the Clinton administration because Bill Clinton had an affair. They were upset. The presidency of the United States, oh my God, we cannot accept that. The evangelical, the Christian, they could not possibly accept that something so disgusting happening in our government. Fast forward to Donald Trump. Those same individuals, they all lined up behind Donald Trump. Yes, the only thing Donald Trump has done is expose Republicans, those who claim to be Christian, those who claim to be patriot, all those, Donald Trump helped to expose them for who they really are. Because they claim, they have words, they're always talking about, they good on national defense. They want to defend the country against enemies, against Russia, against this. Those same Republicans today, they take trips to Russia to deliver messages from Donald Trump to Vladimir Putin. Up to today, the country has no idea what they went to Russia for. So no, Donald Trump did not turn the country, did not turn the Republican Party. The Republican Party, the members of the Republican Party have always been who they really are. The only thing Donald Trump has done is expose those individuals for who they really are. Now you have a bunch of Republican delegation to Russia. They excluded Democrats. Ask yourself the question, why? Why did they exclude Democrats? Because it has always been that when there is a delegation going to a foreign country, it's always been Republican and Democrat. No matter who is in the Oval Office. That's always the case. Until now, just Republican. Twice, they went to Russia, Democrat excluded. And Donald Trump, as we already know, had 5 meetings with Vladimir Putin, nobody present. Well, yes, but Republicans are really strong defense and defenders of the nation. We have been duped by those Republicans who claim to be Christians and they are not, who claim to be patriots and they are not, who claim to be decent and they are not, who claim to be fiscally conservative and they are not. Yes, Republicans, they just been masking people. That's why you see the banner, politics or deception. Because it's one thing to be a shrewd politician, but it's a completely different thing to go around deceiving people. Deception is not politics. Now, the politicians are not the only members responsible for the problem. Those individual Republican constituents, they are too, because they're the one who are supporting those individuals doing those wrong things. They elect them, re-elect them, So they okay with it. So the whole Republican Party, when they talk about core values, what is that? What exactly is the core value? What exactly are those core values? I'd like to know, because everything that I just mentioned to you, Republicans have claimed to have them, and yet that's in words, but in actions, just the opposite. So what are those core values? And I'm not asking for a list of core values. I'm asking as to what action justify the idea of talking about those core values. Because telling me you're a saint, anybody can say that the devil has. So telling me you're a saint doesn't make you a saint. Republicans have the knack for telling you what they are, who they are. But in their actions, they are worse than the devil. And I don't mean that figuratively, because their actions clearly are detrimental to the United States of America. Now you have a corrupt president who is no doubt, and I wrote about that several times. If you go to peoplebranch.org, you'll find out that it's not now, it's not because of Robert Mueller. It was pretty clear to me that Donald Trump was in bed with Vladimir Putin. Today, we're finding out with more information coming out that it's the case, but I made a full analysis of the situation of Donald Trump behavior and was able to conclude that it is no doubt that Donald Trump was in bed with Vladimir Putin, and still is. And those Republican legislators, they're not stupid people. They can see that very clearly. But it is also my analysis, my conclusion, that quite a few members in the Republican parties were also involved in that scandal, were also in bed with Russia. That's why they're so eager to protect Donald Trump so that those information don't come out. So we do have a problem in America, because leaders are supposed to lead, not to deceive, not to take the followers in wrong direction. Leaders are supposed to lead, to open opportunities where there is none, to guide their followers. Republican legislators, congressmen, senators, they have been doing just the opposite. Remember Devin Nunes, chairman of the Intelligence Committee for the House? What did he do? Anything good? No. He was working to help derail the investigation on against Trump. Go figure that out. A congressman whose primary job is to help protect the integrity of the nation, who took an oath of office and oath to uphold the Constitution, what did he put all the resources to do? Yes, when I say the Republicans are corrupt and they're doing all the wrong things, this is not a figure of speech. They have been collaborating with an individual in the Oval Office and taking the country in the wrong path. That's not anything to celebrate. If you are a patriot, I don't care which political party you are, if you are a patriot, this is nothing to celebrate. This is nothing to cheer about. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a moment in the history of the United States that is a dark moment in our history. Yes, slavery was the first. This is a dark moment when you have all members of a political party completely sold out to a foreign entity. You have a group that's trying to slow down, that's trying to derail, and that's trying to smear the very individual that's working to actually protect our country. You have a group that's already involved, and you have another group that simply shrug it off. Yes, this is what we have in the United States of America. A political party that's completely useless to the nation. From the president, congressmen, senators, governors, mayors, completely useless to the nation. But worse, they contribute to actually destroy our country. Because it's one thing, it is one thing to find out that someone is doing something wrong, but it is completely something different when you participate in helping, shielding, protecting, or even pretend that everything is okay, everything is normal. It is not normal, people. This is not the way that things are supposed to be in the country. And as it stands today, the Republican Party is behind the very problem our democracy confronts.
Ignorance, they say, is the biggest threat to any democracy. Indeed, it is. Plato, a Greek philosopher born in 427 BC, said that ignorance is the root and stem of all evil. Today, members in the Republican Party wear ignorance as a badge of honor, while the rest of the country watch powerless the destruction of a country which was once the enemy of the world. The media is the enemy of the country, said Donald Trump. The Democrat legislators are obstructionists for not going along with everything the president wants. The Department of Justice is biased for investigating corruption in the Trump administration. This is the United States of America. Any question? Join me here on the 4th branch at 10:30 a.m. every Saturday. And every weekday at 2 p.m.
fourth branch. Common sense in a world of chaos. This program will resume in just a moment.
Thank you for spending the time with me. I hope you found this program interesting and enlightening. If you have any questions, suggestions, comments, criticism, please do not hesitate to contact us. Should you have a topic you would like us to talk about, please let us know. We will research the topic and we will debate here on the fourth branch. In the meantime, I hope you have a wonderful afternoon and see you tomorrow at 2 p.m.
The Fourth Branch Podcast is brought to you in collaboration with the People Branch publication, which can be found on the People Branch website, located at peoplebranch.org. That's peoplebranch.org. That's peoplebranch.org website, in which you will find a number of very interesting articles. My name is Mike Duchenne, MD for short. I hope you have a great afternoon or a great evening, whichever it happens to be. Hopefully you can join me again next time for another interesting episode of this podcast. That was the Fourth Branch, live from New York. Good day.